Episode 211, IRONMAN 70.3 Indian Wells with Alyson Watson. Welcome to the pursuit of the perfect race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in there for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. Today I'm talking with Alyson Watson about her recent race at IRONMAN 70.3 Indian Wells that took place on December 9th, 2018. The temperature on race day was 45 and rose to around 80 degrees. She had a time of 4 hours, 50 minutes, and 10 seconds, which allowed her to place first in her division. Welcome to the show, Alyson. I look forward to talking about your race.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. So what made you want to do this race in the first place?
Well, this was a weird season for me. I started off the year with IRONMAN Texas in April and was in a bike accident and had a long recovery period. So initially my plan for the year was IRONMAN Texas and then hopefully Kona. And if not Kona, then IRONMAN Wisconsin. But I had to defer Wisconsin because I wasn't ready to do a full yet. And so I was excited by the option of doing an inaugural race in California since I live in California and late season, which gave me enough time to kind of get back into shape for a good race.
Wow. So I think you kind of skipped over a lot when you said long recovery. I mean, this was a little bit different. What happened at Texas?
Yeah, so I was really excited going into IRONMAN Texas. I was coming off a really good 140.6 in 2017 at Mont Tremblant. Had some great training, and I was going for a Kona slot there. I had a pretty good swim, great bike until mile 105 when I managed to crash on a well-marked speed bump. Still not sure if I hit debris or exactly what happened. But I went over the handlebars, landed kind of on my shoulder, and one of my legs stayed clipped in. So I ended up breaking 6 ribs and my sternum. I had a 3rd-degree AC separation, which basically means I tore all the attachments between my clavicle and my shoulder blade. And then I broke my hip on the right side where I had stayed clipped in. And they repaired that by putting a titanium rod down my femur and 4 screws. So I spent 5 days in the hospital in Texas before coming home in a wheelchair. Spent 6 weeks in the wheelchair and then went through the process of walking again and then eventually, running again. And then also with all the upper body injuries, it took a little while to get my swim back. And so I spent most of the summer either in a wheelchair or rehabbing. So I was really looking forward to having a nice end to the season and being able to race again. I really didn't think that I'd be able to race again this year. So it was great to have, this option, this late season option that was close to home and then have a great race.
Wow. So just to kind of get into the weeds a little bit, what was the billing like with the hospital in Texas? Were you out of pocket being that it was in a race? Did they use your insurance? What was this like?
My personal insurance covered it all, actually, which was great. I was a little nervous about that. I have an HMO and I live in California and I was in Texas. But it all was pretty seamless. I got great care. I was, it's the Memorial Hermann IRONMAN Texas, and I was at Memorial Hermann Hospital in the Woodlands, which I thought was a little funny because there were a lot of bike crashes and the hospital was the sponsor. So it was a little ironic, but I got great care. I was out of pocket just for my deductible. There's also, I didn't realize until this happened, there's insurance through your one-day USAT membership. So I did get a letter, but I didn't need to use that because my own personal insurance covered it all. And then in terms of work, I was off work for about a month. So
wow.
So I had short-term disability kicked in at home.
Wow. So talk a little bit more about the struggles you faced from the mental aspect, because this was your first real DNF.
Right. Yeah. So it was really difficult. I was so focused on that race and, that was really kind of my A race for the season because I was going for a Kona slot and then hoping I'd have, most of the season to prepare. I was having a great race. It was a tough race. So anyone who kind of followed the coverage of IRONMAN Texas there was pretty rampant drafting on the bike course, and it was pretty frustrating. So I think I was distracted by that. I definitely managed to avoid the pelotons, which was not easy and intentional. And I kind of made a conscious decision that if I didn't get a Kona slot because of it, I didn't get a Kona slot because of it. But I was really kind of focused on the run, and I needed to have a good run because I needed to run down some folks who'd passed me on the bike, even though I had a pretty darn good bike. So to crash at that point was pretty devastating, to not be able to finish the race. And then, it was really hard to get back on the bike after that. So I've only been doing triathlon for about 3 years. I had to buy a bike in 2015 to do my first triathlon. So to have a crash that was that severe was pretty difficult to come back from. I spent a lot of time on the trainer, but then, had to kind of get outside and get over that. So it was definitely difficult. I was afraid, and it was not at all the race that I had, thought and hoped it would be. Right. And I really didn't think that, when I was in Texas in the hospital, I wasn't sure if I'd ever run again. Just with the injury that I had to my leg, let alone this year, I really didn't think I'd have a chance to race this year. So, I did compete in Ironman Santa Cruz 70.3 in September because it's pretty close to my house, actually. It's only about an hour and a half from where I live. I knew I wasn't ready to do the run, but I wanted to get out there to do the bike because I knew that I was afraid of it and that I was going to spend a lot of time out of aero and a lot of time coasting, which I did. But it was good for kind of getting over that mental hurdle and the fear from the crash at Texas. So I had the opportunity to do that in September, which helped a lot going into this race because I'd kind of gotten over that a little bit before getting out in Indian Wells.
Right. So when you were at Texas, did you have Sherpas with you?
I had my coach was there, and I also had just a friend who was helping me as a Sherpa. Not my family. My family wasn't there, which is good and bad. I have 2 little kids. They're 8 and 10. So I was kind of glad that I love it when they're at races, but I was glad they weren't at that one because I think it would have been traumatic for them. As it were, I was in Texas in the hospital for 5 days. So it was a little awkward, like trying to get my family out there because they weren't there with me and have coverage for my kids. But by the time I got home, I was recovered enough that, my kids just thought it was fun to like ride around in the wheelchair. And it was a lot less traumatic for them than had they been there, I think, and seen me in the hospital.
Right. So what did that look like as far as your flights? Because you had to get new flights. How did you get your phone? What happened to the bike? Because there's a lot of logistics that a lot of people don't know about whenever this kind of stuff happens. And being that you've experienced this and gone through that, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it was a mess. So I crashed. I crashed right near volunteers, which was probably a good thing. So they came over and kind of picked up my stuff a little bit. And they asked who they could call for me. And I said, I need an ambulance. At the time, I thought I had just broken my collarbone. I really did not have a sense for the extent of my injuries, but I knew that my race was over. So I asked them to call an ambulance. They said, well, we can't call an ambulance. We have to call the race folks. But is there someone we can call for you? And I said, well, can you call my emergency contact, which was a friend who was visiting from DC. And they said, well, we don't have access to your sheet. And I didn't have my phone. I didn't know the number. So I had them call my husband and had him call the person who was at the race to say that I crashed and that I was going to be taken to, and they told me I'd be taken to Memorial Hermann in the Woodlands. So then I proceeded to wait. And I waited for about probably 15 minutes for someone to pull up in a pickup truck, not an ambulance. He got out, came over and said, so do you think you can still race? And I said, no, I absolutely cannot still race. It was the triage person. So I guess they'll first send a triage person because a lot of folks end up in the med tent. So that makes sense. So he, cut off my jersey and he was like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, you could visibly see that I was broken. So he called an ambulance and waited with me while they called the ambulance, which took about another 15 minutes. Partly, I think, because there were so many bike crashes.
And how much pain were you in at this point?
I was in shock. So initially it wasn't that painful. The road rash was probably the worst. And it just felt like my breathing felt off because of the ribs probably being broken. But over time it got to be more painful, and I started to kind of panic a little bit because it was that pain where you just know something's just really wrong. But my leg, I had tried to kind of walk and it felt weird, but I didn't realize that I'd broken anything. So I was still kind of in shock. So then we're waiting for the ambulance, and the triage guy said, well, I'm going to start an IV on you. So he told me that he'd never done one of those on the side of the road. It was like, great, thanks for telling me that. So he starts an IV, and then he said, oh, well, sorry, I don't have anything to put in it. So I'm sitting there with my jersey cut off, an IV with nothing in it on the side of the road waiting for an ambulance. So it was pretty horrible. The ambulance finally came, and they were great. They got me to the ER and everything was good. The volunteer who was there said she would stay with my bike. So my friend had called my coach also, and she said, your coach is going to come get your bike. So I'm in the ER, and my friend found me in the ER. And like an hour later, he got a phone call that was like, Alyson Watson has been transported to Memorial Hermann. So it was good that we'd done the phone relay because he never would have known where I was. Meanwhile, my coach went to get my bike. He went to the location where I had crashed, where the volunteer was waiting with it. And then the volunteer was not allowed to give it to him, even though he had the little card. So they then took my bike back to transition. So he then had to go to transition to get my bike. So it was really awkward in that they told him he could go pick it up from the volunteer. He went to do that. And then they were like, oh, wait, no, you can't. You have to go. So there were definitely some kinks. And I think part of it is that it's volunteers. So, they don't necessarily, they haven't done it 10 times. They don't necessarily know the protocols, but it was really not easy or straightforward. He was able to get my bike eventually, but it was kind of like driving all over the race course to try to get it.
And getting your bike on race day isn't that easy until a certain time of the day, because right. I was at transition at IRONMAN Texas here, and we have to wait till the last bike comes in and everybody starts getting cut, and then we can open it up, and then only so many people are allowed in transition at a time, and then they check all the cards. And most of the time, it's a volunteer is assigned to each person coming in. They walk with them to the bike, and then they walk with them out, then rinse, repeat until everybody gets their bikes. But yeah. It's a madhouse there, so it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was able to get it, and I used Tri Bike Transport for that race. So it was easy enough for him to just bring it over and drop it off. And it came home in one piece, just needed some bar tape, unlike me.
Wow.
I came home a little more broken than my bike.
So what was your husband thinking at this point?
He was pretty panicked.
Because he was in California going, okay, she DNF'd, she's at the hospital, I'm not there, what's going on? Like, that's all I know.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a volunteer that called him, and she said, and I said, tell him I'm all right. Tell him I'm all right. I'm on the ground on the side of the road. But so then when my friend met me at the hospital, then I called. Of course, my mom was panicked. She was in New Hampshire, so she was calling saying, I'm gonna get on the next plane, and I'm still thinking I just broke my collarbone, so let's not all panic here. And then, every time they would come back in they'd send me for an x-ray, and there would be something else that was broken. So eventually I kind of, realized that it wasn't just a collarbone, and I was going to be there for a while. So my mom, my dad flew to California from New Hampshire to stay with my kids, and my mom flew from New Hampshire to Texas, and my husband flew from California to Texas. So, my mom and my husband were with me in the hospital at that point.
Wow. So it takes a village.
It does take a village.
So this quick trip to Texas turned into a family vacation kind of in Texas.
Yeah.
What was all of this like for you emotionally? Because this had to be hard.
Yeah, it was really hard. I have kind of a big stressful job with a decent amount of travel, and I had sort of shoehorned this all into. So the race was, I don't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday now.
It's Saturday.
It's Saturday, right? I had surgery Sunday. But my plan was to leave Monday morning. I had like a 6 a.m. flight to Boston, actually, for work. So I was headed to Texas. I was just going to stay through the weekend. First flight out on Monday morning to Boston for work for this big shareholder meeting. And so, I'm in the hospital also calling the CEO of my company saying, sit down. I've been in a bike accident. I'm going to be okay, but I'm definitely not going to be there. I'm not even going to be able to call in. Like, I'm on morphine. This is not what I planned. It's all going to be fine. But so I think for the first couple of days, it was more trying to calm everybody else down, to be honest. And then it sort of hit me after that, kind of what had happened, and so how was I going to get home, and
because you had to cancel flights or rebook flights. Did they allow you to just reschedule the flights, or did you have to buy whole new tickets?
No, I bought new tickets. I didn't actually know when I was leaving the hospital. So with the surgery on Sunday, they said, well, you'll probably be here till at least Friday or Saturday. But we'll have to wait and see how you do, kind of thing. So I couldn't book a flight because I didn't even know when I would leave. And then I progressed really quickly, I guess. I was able to get out of bed after a couple of days. So Thursday morning, they said, okay, well, you can go. And I said, well, actually, I can't because I have nowhere to go. I need to get a flight and all of that. So we just booked Thursday, and I was in a wheelchair. So we booked first class tickets back.
Wow.
So it was not cheap. Yeah. But I mean, I could have booked coach, but I felt like it was worth the extra money, considering that I was in that much pain, and, the thought of trying to get up and down the aisle of a plane was not very exciting. Yeah. So one of the first times I've ever bought myself a first class flight. And it wasn't that enjoyable, but it was worth it. So, yeah. So we ended up having to get an Uber to the airport, which was also, you don't think of these things as being difficult, but when you're in a wheelchair and you're not used to it, and you're like, my upper body on the left side was completely broken and I couldn't really use my arm. Yeah. And sore and in a lot of pain. And then, so I had my right arm, and then my right leg was completely, I just had major surgery on it. So I had like my right arm and my left leg.
And they cleared you to fly.
And they cleared me to fly. Yeah, they did search me at the airport. And they were trying to make me stand up out of the wheelchair. And it was pretty awful, to be honest. And then to get on a plane in a wheelchair, like a normal wheelchair is too wide for the aisles, but if you really can't walk, they have a wheelchair that they put you in. So they have to transport you from one wheelchair to a very skinny little wheelchair, and then kind of like almost carry you to your seat. And I was sure that they were going to drop me. It was awful,
Wow.
to be honest. And because of the flying, I was on pretty heavy duty anticoagulants, because blood clots are a big risk with that type of surgery, even if you're not flying. So I was on like twice a day injections in my stomach of this like anticoagulant. And so it was quite an ordeal getting home.
Wow. So once you got home and settled down, did you get depressed or anything thinking about everything you went through? Because, I mean, going for Kona is a feat in itself. And then putting all of your winter training, because IRONMAN Texas is one of the very first Ironmans you can do in North America, and putting all that time and effort into this one event is devastating if you DNF. And this was your first DNF, and it was horrific with all the logistics. And it probably wasn't until after you got home that you had to deal with all this.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And, part of it too, I was on such crazy painkillers that does soften the mental blow. I was sort of in a fog for the first, I think it was like about a week or 10 days that I was on painkillers. And, I started a blog actually about it when I got home because it was extremely depressing. I struggled with it a lot. Triathlon is a big part of my life, and it's a big outlet for me, and it's my passion. So to not be able to do that, to not know if I was ever going to be able to do that again, was really difficult. And I remember the day. So when I got back, I had a new doctor here in California, and it was like the last day that I had the, heavy duty narcotics. And he said, you'll be all right. Just switch to Advil and Tylenol. And so I did that. And then the next morning when I woke up, it was like I just heard the news again. It was like the first time that it actually really sunk in what had happened and what it meant for the future. And it was pretty awful. And I had nightmares for a while.
Really?
Yeah. And like I would be on the bike and trying not to crash, like in my nightmares. And so it was pretty traumatic. And that's partly why I started that blog, was because what I found is that when I would get really kind of in a negative place and I would start to write about it, it made it easier for me to reframe and to think about it differently and to try to have a positive attitude and think about, what could I do? Because there's always something you can do. There really is always something you can do, and you can always be moving forward. But it's really difficult sometimes to realize that and to see it and to actually do it. So writing about it helped me a lot, but it was very traumatic. And it took me, weeks to really start to have a positive attitude about moving forward. And I will say during that period, my coach was phenomenal. He would put stuff in Training Peaks. It would be like 5 minutes on the recumbent, but I had stuff in my Training Peaks. And so I was able to feel like, I'm doing something positive and I'm moving forward and I'm making progress, and I'm not at all where I wanted to be or where I thought I would be. But, I'm going to come out of this, and it may look different, but, I don't have to give up this whole part of my life.
Wow. So after you recovered and you finished with basically getting off the narcotics and you transitioned to physical therapy and all that, how was your recovery? You said it went pretty quick.
Well, the physical therapy thing is really interesting. So you asked how medical insurance and all of that worked, and I was not able to get physical therapy.
Really?
I got a prescription for physical therapy, but no physical therapist would accept it because I have an HMO. So it would have been out of pocket.
What does HMO mean?
It basically just means that you're limited to a specific provider network. You need to have a referral from your primary care physician. And it has something on the back end to do with how they've negotiated rates and things. So there were no physical therapists that would accept my insurance. So I would have had to pay out of pocket. So I could have gotten physical therapy if I was willing to pay out of pocket. And I am very stubborn and on principle would not pay out of pocket when I have insurance. So I didn't actually have any physical therapy once I left the hospital. I sort of put together my own little plan and just started working it. So I started 3 weeks post-op. I started with a recumbent bike with no resistance, just to spin my legs and to kind of get that range of motion going. It wasn't until I could walk. I wasn't allowed to bear any weight until 6 weeks after the surgery. And at that point, So at that point, I graduated to putting a little bit of resistance and then it was a couple more weeks, I think, before I could actually get my leg up over my actual bike to get on the trainer, which is why I'd been on the recumbent the whole time. So then, I switched over.
So you just have a recumbent bike hanging around your house?
We ordered one. I got a cheapo one online for like $100, but it has like the flat seat, so I could go from the wheelchair to the bike. So I did that, and then once I could walk, I started walking on the treadmill, for a couple minutes at a time at first, just building up the time. Around, I think it was about 5 weeks post-op or after the accident, I started swimming. Just waited until it didn't hurt, basically, with my shoulder and my ribs. So by like 5 or 6 weeks, I was on the recumbent bike a little bit. I was swimming a little bit. I was trying to do aqua jogging, which is kind of awful, and I hate it. And I hope I never.
It's so weird, isn't it?
It's really weird. But I had the little belt. I was doing the deep water stuff, and at first it was more just moving my leg around in like different positions to try to, have it not scar up in ways that limited range of motion. And then over time, I was trying to actually have it be more like running and get my heart rate up, which I never really succeeded at doing. But I tried. So for biking, it was the recumbent, and then eventually the trainer, and then adding resistance. For running, as soon as I could start doing the aqua jogging, I was doing that. And then it was walking, and then walking and a little bit of running, and kind of that progression, and also elliptical. I did the elliptical before I could run. And that was pretty much it. And then swimming probably came back the fastest because it was probably 6 weeks or so. Everything was pretty much healed up for swimming.
Wow. So 6 weeks, I'm sitting here looking at the calendar. That's first week of June, thereabout?
Yeah, around then, yeah.
Wow. So from June through September, October, November, how was your training through this? I know you did Santa Cruz, but that was really just a swim a bike, right?
I ran.
Oh, you did?
I did a walk run, yeah. So yeah, biking was great, actually, which is surprising because it was a hip injury. So you would think that biking would have been really hard to get back. But I think partly because I wasn't running, it came back fairly quickly. I think by August, maybe I was back to around where my FTP was for Texas, which was great. So my bike came back pretty quickly. My swim, we can talk about my swim. My swim actually came back pretty quickly, and then I sort of stopped swimming. So that's a whole different story, not related to the injury. And then the running was hard. The running, I didn't really start running until I think it was like the very last weekend of July. I was allowed to try to run a few steps. So then, Santa Cruz is like the second weekend of September. So I'd only like even started running a couple of steps like a month, 5 weeks before that.
Wow.
So I had like the world's fastest like ramp up to Santa Cruz just to be able to complete 13 miles on my feet. But it was definitely a walk run. I think I walked almost as much as I ran in that, but I did finish the race. So then, but by then I was at least able to run. So it was more just building up the run to be able to run a full 13.1 miles without walking, by Indian Wells.
Wow. And from Santa Cruz going into Indian Wells, how was your training? Because it seems like by that time you're almost back in the full swing of things.
Yeah. So my training was pretty good. My bike was fantastic. I was biking a ton. By the time going into Indian Wells, my FTP was higher than it was before Texas. So bike, no issues. My run wasn't quite where I'd hoped it would be, just with my recovery rate. But, in April, I didn't know if I'd ever run again. So can't really complain too much. I'd say I'm probably about 80% there in terms of getting my run back. And then work was just really crazy this fall and winter. And I was traveling for, I think, 3 out of the 4 weeks leading up to Indian Wells. And I just really didn't have time to swim. And so I didn't. So I had done very, very little swimming. And I got out of the swim pretty much what I put into it, which is not a great time. So.
Wow. So were you doing a lot of bricks in training?
I do a lot of bricks. I do a lot of short brick runs. So I was biking like generally about 5 days a week, and probably 4 of those I'd have a run after the bike. Usually a short run, either, easy, or my coach likes to sometimes have you do a really hard bike and then like a fast 5K. So that kind of running.
Okay. Yeah. So I know you're with Matthew Shanks, and he's also a professional triathlete. How did you find him as far as a coach goes, and how is this relationship going?
Yeah. So I started training with Matt a little over a year ago. I was looking for a new coach after Ironman Mont Tremblant and kind of shopping around a little bit. I wanted somebody who was familiar with what it takes, I think, to compete at a really high level. So Kona, or, obviously as a pro triathlete, he knows what that's like. He is big on intensity, as opposed to like a lot of hours of low intensity work. He's fewer hours at higher intensity, which works really well for me, because I have a pretty compressed schedule, a big job, and little kids. And he's pretty humble, and he's just a nice guy. So, I started working with him, and like right away, I started to see results. And what I really like about him is that he's a really good listener. He doesn't come at it like he knows all the answers and you need to just, shut up and listen to him. He'll listen to what you say and take your feedback, and work that into your plan. So certain things, like when I first started with him, I had my run zone set based on my lactate threshold from a 5K. And he had me on the bike and run, not look at any data for a while and just do everything based on perceived exertion, and then sort of compared that. And, particularly for running, what he found was that, okay, so my heart rate might say I was in zone 2, but it felt too hard for me for zone 2. So he adjusted my zones to really match, kind of to blend the data and the perceived exertion. And so I really like
what was that like? How what did he do there to blend the two?
So he would basically say, this is what zone 1 should feel like. This is what zone 2 should feel like. This is what zone 3, and had me just go off of that for a while and then compare that to what the data says. And for bike, it was pretty close. But for run, like when I was at the top of zone 2, like it felt hard for me. It was not something that I would be able to comfortably hold for a couple hours.
It's not your all day pace.
Right. So he basically lowered it. He just lowered my heart rate zones, lowered my zones to be more consistent. So, maybe it wasn't as low as what my perceived exertion looked like, but it wasn't as high as what my heart rate said, so that, I'm not supposed to be in zone 2, but I feel like I'm pushing.
Wow. That's the first time I've heard of somebody blending RPE and heart rate zones. Now, I know you have a power meter. Are you doing the same things with the power zones, or are you strictly using the heart rate there? What is this like?
No, I do everything off of power now. For bike, it matched up pretty well anyway in terms of perceived effort. So my zones are pretty much just set off my FTP at this point.
Wow.
It was more running, and, in particular for running, trying to avoid running injuries too, so being a little bit more conscious. If I'm going to have a really long run and it's supposed to be zone 2, supposed to be all day pace, if I'm pushing too hard, like, does that kind of put me at higher risk for injury, and being a little cautious there.
Okay. So just to kind of transition more of the Indian Wells training specifically, how many hours did your training max out at?
I'd have to look, but it was not too much. Like 15 to 18 is about where I've maxed out. I had some weeks that were a lot lower than that, depending on what I was doing with work. But 15 to 18 is like a big week for me.
Okay. So with that, how are you mitigating the risk of being injured? Because you have a high risk of being injured at this point in your life, because you're coming off of a bad crash, multiple surgeries, and now you have hardware, and you don't want to get injured again, and you're trying to ramp up and get back to your level. So how is this?
It's a good question. Well, a lot of that time is biking, which for me, I'm pretty resilient when it comes to biking. Like, I don't seem to get injured biking. So, of that, 10 to 12 hours is on the bike. So that's, relatively low risk for me for injury. And then the running, a lot of shorter runs. So more frequent, shorter runs. I didn't do any like monster runs. I did a 15-mile run. That was my longest run leading into it. But generally my runs were more, my long run might be 10 miles. And I'm built, my total run volume was not that high. And it was more, 3 to 5 mile runs building it up.
Wow.
So focusing where I have lower risk for injury.
So as the volume increases and intensity increases as well, how did you and Matt reduce the risk of getting injured?
I think just more paying attention to, if I had any issues starting. But it was, just a gradual ramp up. So
were y'all doing strength training or mobility, rolling out, stretching, yoga, anything like that?
No, all things that I should be doing, but I don't. So no. I tend to not be super injury prone. Again, especially with the bike, like I can go pretty hard and not have many issues. I did play around with my fit a little bit, which was a little bit nerve wracking because I was afraid, like, what if that causes me to get an injury? But it didn't. So, and I wanted to be more aero. So I got, I tweaked my fit a little bit on the bike, but, just focusing most of the time on the bike where I'm, less prone to injury, and then the swimming. That's sort of my background. I was a not amazing swimmer, but I was a swimmer for 10 years competitively. I don't tend to get swimming injuries. I don't tend to get biking injuries. So then just being a little more careful with the running. But no, I do roll occasionally, but it's usually if I start to have some sort of niggling pains, then I'll do that. But I don't have like a regular routine, something to work on.
Right. So going into Indian Wells, what workouts did you do that gave you the confidence to go into this race prepared?
Yeah, so biking, as I said, my FTP, so every week to 2 weeks, I'll do a critical power bike workout, and that's a good benchmarking workout for me related to my FTP. So I knew in terms of power, I was there. I'd also done a couple workouts that were half Ironman pacers, like 3 times 30 minutes, and I was where I wanted to be there. So, and then the week before, I was able to do like a mini training camp for one day with my coach, which was a lot of fun because our race pace is pretty close. It's not too far off. So I got to just kind of chase him for a while. And so I knew that I was pretty good, but I wasn't too worried about the bike. The swim, I just hadn't been swimming. So I was actually just hoping they would cancel it, which is terrible strategy. It's not a strategy. And then the run, I had done one 15-mile run, and I'd done a couple long runs that had half Ironman pacers. So, maybe 4 by 1 mile at my goal, half Ironman pace. And I was able to do that. So the run, I didn't have super high hopes. Like, my biggest goal was to run the whole thing. I figured if I ran 8-minute pace, I'd be happy. I was hoping I'd be closer to 7:15 or 7:30, but mostly I just wanted to run the whole thing. So the bike was really the focus area for me. And I'd say, knowing where my power was, and then having some time outside, like at that power, kind of gave me the confidence that I should be able to be where I wanted to be.
Wow. So in regards to your training, were there any days where, you just didn't want to train? You get on the bike or you just look at the bike and you're like, I don't want to do this right now.
Swimming. Yeah. That happens a lot. Cause I do a lot of my training super early. So, like a normal, if I'm in a training block, like a normal day for me, I'm usually up by 4. So it's dark and it's cold, and the thought of getting in a cold pool is really horrible. And the pool that I go to is only open from 5 to 8 a.m. So the swim is usually the first thing to go, if anything. I usually, some days I don't want to bike, but it's usually not that bad. I don't usually ever skip bikes. And then, the runs, I haven't been doing that many. So I have some days like that, but usually, mostly I like to train. So.
All right. So I know you have 2 little ones, and you also have a full-time job that demands traveling. How big of an issue is balancing life, work, and training?
It's an issue for everyone, I think. Sometimes I wish I didn't have the job and my job's getting in the way of my training. But it's important because triathlon's expensive. No, I think part of what I love about triathlon and what attracted me to it in the first place is related to my job. So I like pressure and I like the stress of my job, but triathlon gives me a really nice release and kind of counterbalance to that. So my biggest challenge is making sure that I get enough sleep, and I'm really regimented about that. Like, I'm usually in bed by 8:30 every night, because I can't not get enough sleep. That's the most important thing. So, it's hard to balance. I go to bed about when my kids do, but, most of my training I do so early, they're already asleep, or they're still asleep. They haven't gone to school yet. And I go to bed around when they do. So I try to maximize the time that I have with them. Even on the weekends, I get up really early. So even long workouts on the weekends, I try to be done by 10 or 11 in the morning so that I've got the whole day with my kids.
Nice.
Yeah.
So just to kind of transition a little bit more to this, when did you want to start getting to the race venue?
So I flew to Palm Springs, and I got there Thursday night. I flew my bike. Tri-Bike Transport did service this race, but it was really kind of limited. So I was thinking I would use them, but by the time they opened it, it was basically sold out everywhere anyway. So I flew my bike, which was really easy, to Palm Springs Airport, got there Thursday night, so that I would have some time on Friday. Our team was getting together on Friday, and then that gave me a chance to ride a little bit on the course before Saturday, kind of getting all my stuff together. It's a point-to-point race, so Saturday was pretty busy doing all that. Wow.
So kind of with the check-in process and bike drop-off, how was all this for you?
Yeah, so Friday got to ride the course a little bit. Saturday for the check-in, my Saturday did not go as planned. So what I wanted to do was get a bike and a run in. Maybe a swim if I could fit it, just a short bike, short run before I dropped everything off so that I'd have my equipment, obviously. So I went for a bike ride with a couple of friends, and one of my friends got 2 flats on our short bike. Yes. So the bike ride took a lot longer than planned.
Who did you go bike ride with?
Cynthia Steele. So she's on my team also. And yeah, she she hit like a pothole and flatted both wheels, basically.
Gosh.
But didn't realize it. She changed one, and then we started going and realized she had another flat, and we didn't have another tube. So then it was riding back to get a car to come back, and some unplanned time. So so there was that. So I had kind of driven the course a little bit, then had this bike ride experience that took forever. So then I was kind of in panic mode because also on that bike ride, my gears weren't shifting very smoothly. So I had wanted to get my bike looked at and just kind of tuned up before the race, before I dropped it off. So got her back to the hotel I was staying at, and there happened to be Velofix in the parking lot, which is fantastic. So
perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. So I just gave them my bike. They got it tuned up, then went to drop it off. So to do that, we had to drive out to the swim venue, which was probably 15 or 20 minutes away. It wasn't that close. So I was staying right by the tennis garden, which is where the finish line is. So drove out to drop off the bike. One thing about Indian Wells that was interesting, I've never seen before, was there's wetsuit decontamination.
What do you mean?
So in California, there's not much swimming in drinking water reservoirs. And in Southern California in particular, there's a concern about invasive species in drinking water reservoirs that make it hard to treat the water. So they had everybody decontaminate their wetsuits. So if you'd been swimming somewhere else, you weren't like bringing in any species to the lake. So to do that, you had to bring your wetsuit, and this was a really cold swim. We actually thought it might be canceled because it was so cold. So wetsuit, anything neoprene, so cap and booties if you're using them, to this little like swimming pool that was full of chlorine, and you had to decontaminate, hold your wetsuit underwater while they timed you, and then they gave you a little
weird.
Yeah. Then they gave you a little tag for your wetsuit and your booties, and you had to hang them in the tent, in the transition tent.
So kind of like Mont Tremblant, where they have the little hooks in the bags and all that.
Yeah, I did Mont Tremblant, and I don't remember the hooks.
So that's another race that they have the hooks. Like Pass that they have the hooks. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to think of where the hooks are.
So I hadn't done that before. So you go to the tent, and then they had hangers, but they'd run out of hangers because I got there late because my whole day was messed up. So I had to wait for hangers, but then they had basically just, the whole walls of the tent lined with people's wetsuits hanging on these hangers, which you just hoped that it would still be there in the morning and be dry, but none of them were, and a lot of them were on the ground. So that was kind of a bummer. So did the wetsuit decontamination and checked in my bike. And so it was pretty smooth. It was just a little bit far away, and the decontamination was a little bit different, kind of trying to figure out what that was all about.
So after you get all your stuff checked in, your bike checked in, all that fun stuff, do y'all go out to dinner? Try to get a certain meal in? What is this like?
Yeah, so a bunch of my teammates were going out to dinner, but I usually like the night before a race to have eaten by 4. I don't really want to be eating late because I want to make sure that I have time to have digested it. So they were all going, but I didn't get to check my bike in until it was after 4 when I was leaving there. So I did not go out with everybody. I like to have pizza the night before a race, which I'm mostly plant-based. My normal diet is plant-based, but I have pizza the night before a race. I just feel like it's pretty low residue. I digest it pretty easily, and it's got a lot of sodium, and it's just kind of a routine at this point. So I had pizza, but a lot later than normal. It was probably after 6 by the time I ate, which was sort of a bummer. But yeah, so I skipped going out with everybody, but I did have my pizza.
Nice. So after you eat your pizza, are you trying to get in bed at a certain time?
Yeah, well, I go to bed at 8:30 normally. So it's kind of like normal bedtime. But mixing up my fuel, my bottles for the morning, and getting everything laid out. And then I think I was in bed by 8:30, and I didn't sleep that well. I don't usually sleep well the night before a race, but pretty kind of normal routine for me.
Okay. So whenever you get up, what's your race day morning ritual like, and what time do you get up?
So I got up at 4:20 for this race. Usually first thing I try to eat again, just so that I will have eaten as, early as possible, and then just kind of keep sipping on something after that. So I do usually bring food to races, partly because I do normally eat a plant-based diet, and I generally get a lot of protein, and plant-based protein can be hard to find depending on where you are.
So what kind of meal do you have the morning of the race then?
Yeah, morning of the race, I usually have just peanut butter toast with bananas. So it's more like leading up to the race. But yeah, so I made sure that I had brought, because I like the peanut butter that doesn't have sugar and, the more of a wheat bread. So I had my own bread and my own peanut butter and bananas.
So like the Smucker's all natural. That's what I'm picturing.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that has the oil on the top that you got to mix in.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I understand. Like I started looking into hydrogenated oils and all that. And I'm like, never again. Not doing that.
Yeah, there's so much, and like even in bread and stuff. So I'll usually travel with like Ezekiel bread, that's like the sprouted grain bread, and plant-based protein bars, and my own protein powder, and then of course the race mixes, so the Tailwind and race fuels. So, but yeah, in the morning that's what I have: peanut butter toast with bananas.
Do you have coffee?
I do have coffee on race morning. I don't usually drink caffeinated coffee. But I'll have caffeinated coffee on race morning. It's like a treat. Yeah.
Just to get things moving, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Everybody does it.
Yeah. So breakfast, and then get dressed and get my stuff packed. I usually do the tattoos the night before, and I usually sleep with my timing chip just so I don't have to worry about forgetting it.
Awesome. So after you get over there to the swim start and transition area, how is your anxiety levels knowing that this is going to be a very cold swim and you still have to prepare your bike with your nutrition, and I know you're putting about 100 or 90 PSI in your wheels here. How is all this going for you in transition?
Yeah. So, I had someone give me advice at Ironman Mont Tremblant that, if I was worried about my tires, to not fill them. So to pump them up the night before, check them in the morning, make sure they're still hard. But depending on the change in temperature, it's not going to change that much. So I actually did not put additional air in my tires that morning, which stresses me out a little bit, but there were really long lines to get bike pumps and I hadn't brought one. So I felt like the stress of trying to get additional air in my tires was not worth it. And I felt like they were going to be fine. So I didn't do that. I got all my fuel on my bike. And then I got over to find my wetsuit. So again, the wetsuits had been hanging in the tent, and it was loose organization. And I was worried about
loose organization. What do you mean?
It wasn't like you had a marked spot. There were sections where you were supposed to hang your wetsuit in like your 50 number section. And there were wetsuits all over the floor and people running around saying my wetsuit's gone. And so I was more concerned about making sure that I had what I needed for the swim. And then like the neoprene cap and booties, because it was going to be like a 56-degree swim. And, I wasn't thinking in advance about how to affix the cap and booties to this little wire hanger. So I was worried about having to look for those. So I skipped putting air in my tires, went and found my wetsuit and cap and booties instead, and tried to give myself extra time there.
Okay.
And then the bathroom, porta potty.
After you use the bathroom, you get in your wetsuit. Are you using a certain lube to get your wetsuit on easier?
Yeah, I actually took A&D ointment as like a baby diaper rash thing. I like that even for biking, just anti-chafe. So I had some of that, and I actually put it all over my arms and legs, which normally I would put it around, my wrists and my ankles for the wetsuit, but I put it all over my arms and legs because I was hoping it would help with warmth. Like I haven't done a lot of super cold water swims, but Vaseline, same idea, to lock in some heat. So I used that. And then I had, a cap, my goggles, and then the neoprene booty, and then the neoprene cap, and then another cap, and then the booties.
Wow. Yeah. So were you allowed to get in the water before the race?
You were, and not many people did.
Did you?
No, I did not, because it was a rolling start. I wasn't going to be in the water in the first 10 minutes, and I didn't want to be in, 55-degree water and then standing out for 20 minutes waiting for the race to start. So I didn't, which I don't think I would have changed that. I think I still would not have warmed up, just because if I were towards the very front, I might have. But just the time of standing there in a freezing cold wetsuit, I think you lose the benefit of the warm up.
Okay. So before the race starts, do you and Matt link up and talk about the strategy for you for the race?
I saw him before the race. We didn't really talk about the strategy at that point. We had talked previously, and I hadn't been swimming much. So I didn't have any big goals for the swim. It was kind of just don't drown, do the best I could on minimal training. The bike, I had pretty clear goals around power, but the race plan was get on the bike and just pass as many people as you can. I knew going into it that I could have the fastest female bike split. Like I knew that I could ride as fast as the pros that were racing. So that was really my goal, was just to let her rip on the bike. And then the run again was really under 8 minutes if I could hold it, but most importantly, just keep running. Santa Cruz, when I was running, I ran a decent pace, but I walked a lot. So it was more like, make sure I'm running as opposed to run walking.
Nice. So your mindset going into this race, you knew you were going to crush the bike, hold on for the run, and swim as good as you can.
Yeah. So that was pretty much the plan. But I was definitely apprehensive for the swim, especially where it was going to be so cold. And I knew that I just hadn't done the preparation that I needed to for this race.
Man. So the can goes off for the pros. They all get going, and the female pros, and then the rolling start, and then you get in the water. What was your first impression of the water?
It was cold. It was as cold as I expected. I mean, honestly, so I told you I swam competitively for 10 years, and I don't panic in the water. I'm comfortable in the water. But probably after like 300 yards or so, I was like, man, I don't know if I can do this swim. My arms were just so cold. They were like super tired from being really cold. So I kind of did have a moment of panic. Like I can't drop out on the swim. Like, but I gotta finish this stupid swim. But then, I kind of got going and settled in a little bit. And after that, I think my body temperature warmed up a little bit, but yeah, the first few hundred yards were pretty rough. And then, the swim is like, I had underestimated how technical the swim would be. It's kind
like
of
a big V.
It's a big V, but it's not, it's like 2 buoys at each corner.
Right.
A lot of turns. And so when you start out, you're heading away from the sun, so it's fine. And actually, if you look at my map, you can see it's pretty straight heading out. And then it all went sideways. So then you turn into the sun, and there's a lot of turns. So I swam 2,400 yards. I swam way more than I needed to. I couldn't see anything. So I was just kind of like, get this thing over with. But yeah, it's a V. So, and it was into the sun. So for anyone who's looking at doing it, make sure you look in advance and see where all the buoys are and do the best you can for sighting. I was mostly trying to follow people because I couldn't see anything.
Wow.
But yeah, I swim a little extra.
So whenever you come down, do you have to go to the middle buoy on the bottom of the V?
Yeah. So you
can't cut that tangent.
No, you can't. You have to swim through 2 red buoys in the middle. Yeah, because that was my thing too. Like, why don't you just swim straight across? And then they were like, no, you have to go through the 2 buoys in the middle.
Because that was my first impression of that course. I was like, people can cut that tangent.
Because that's how Texas is. I was thinking
in Texas, you can't cut the tangent.
Yeah, but you can't there. They have 2 buoys set up you have to swim through.
Wow.
Yeah.
So with the swim, did you have a lot of hitting, kicking? How was the quality of the water? What was all this like?
Yeah, the water was great. I drank plenty of it. It was lovely. It tasted wonderful. It was really cold, pretty, it wasn't murky. It didn't smell funny or taste. It was pretty clean water. I heard it was really shallow. Like I obviously didn't try to stand up, but I heard like the deepest point was like 6 feet. So pretty shallow, really cold. But there was plenty of room. Like that was one thing I did actually notice while I was swimming. Like I didn't get hit that much. It was pretty spaced out. Compared to a lot of races I've done. So like, I think my last 2 races I've gotten black eyes, not this race. So that was good. I didn't get jostled too much. So it did feel like there's plenty of space.
So you got a black eye and a wreck in Texas.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had to explain in the ER that the black eye was not from the crash. It was from the swim.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So with the swim, you get out of the swim with 37 minutes and some change.
Yeah.
Did they have wetsuit strippers here?
No, they didn't. Yeah. So just ran into the tent, found your back.
I mean, that's kind of odd. I mean, knowing that the temperature of the water is going to be below 60, everybody's going to be in a wetsuit, and they didn't have wetsuit strippers.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
It seems like the organization there could be a little bit better.
I think so. I mean, it was the inaugural race, so maybe some things that they can improve moving forward. But yeah, no. And like I ran into the tent, and usually like there were no volunteers to help me. Like I did see a volunteer helping somebody, but I was kind of on my own. So
wow, that sucks.
Yeah. So got my stuff off, got my bag.
So this is a clean transition then.
Clean transition, yeah. So the bags were kind of hanging in the middle of the tent, and there were chairs on the outside of the. So changing and stuffing all my stuff back in the bag, and then like you run out of the tent, you kind of just throw your bag. There wasn't a volunteer there either, so I just chucked my bag over the side of the railing and into the pile.
The way you make it sound, it doesn't sound like there was that many volunteers.
There were. I don't know if it was like maybe I came like usually my swim is faster. So maybe I'm used to there being more volunteers. It could have been the timing of when I came out. I'm not really sure why, but yeah, I didn't get a volunteer in the tent over to take my bag when I came out of the tent. One thing that I did that I would recommend, someone had suggested to me, was I put hand warmers. I wore gloves on the bike, which I normally don't do. But I knew the swim was going to be so cold. I was worried about my hands and breaking. So I wore gloves and I put those like hand warmers in them before I swam. And I put hand warmers in my shoes too. So when I got those on, they were nice and warm, which was good because I didn't put on any extra clothes. I just had my tri-kit.
Wow. Because I mean, it's going to get into the high 70s, maybe even in the 80s.
Yeah, but it was cold in the morning. I think it was in the like
40s,
maybe 50, 40s or 50, in the morning. So,
man. So you get your bike. What kind of wheels are you using for this? You said they're pretty deep.
Yeah, I had 60s and 60 in the front and 80 in the back. I would have run a disc. I just don't have one. So definitely could use a disc on this course. It wasn't too windy. I don't know if you have the stats on the wind, but there wasn't a strong wind, at least this year.
I don't have any stats on the bike course yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have or carbon wheels. And yeah, no, it was a good course for a disc if you've got one.
Nice. So how are the first 2 miles of the bike course? So
the one thing about the bike course, it's definitely a fast course. It's definitely a flat course. There are a lot of turns, a lot of 90-degree turns, and there's a couple sections that are pretty rough. So a lot of the southern portion is on kind of, it's an agricultural area. So some sections of the road aren't great. But the worst part of the course was right as you leave T1. It was very chewed up. It was almost like cobblestones. I mean, it was that rough. I had ridden it in advance, so I knew that I could be an aero and push my normal power, and it was fine. But a lot of people were out of aero and kind of going pretty slow on that piece. And then there was another section that they made a last minute change to the bike course. There was a section.
Thankfully.
Yes. Yeah, which was worse. That section was worse than the part coming out of transition. And they changed that to this little out and back instead. And that road wasn't great, but it was not as bad as coming out of transition. That was the worst part of the road. And there were some really nice roads too. So it was just a little bit of a mixed bag. And the one thing I would say with the turns, there were a lot of 90-degree turns, which I'm not a super technical rider to begin with. And then after the crash, I'm pretty timid. So for me, that was slow. The turns were slow. And the other thing is that it had been raining, which is unusual down there. When I flew in Thursday night, it was pouring. And that means that in an agricultural area, they have to take some time, and then they're trying to catch up. So there was a lot of dirt from a lot of trucks moving ag products around. So a lot of the turns were covered with sand. There's like loose dirt. So you did have to slow down for a lot of them just for safety, because you could slide out pretty easily on the sand.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're using about 90 PSI. Did you feel like that was too much or too little?
No, I mean, I felt like it was good. Normally I would probably do closer to 100. So I had gone a little bit lighter just because I knew, especially coming out of T1, there was that really rough section. And, there were a couple other rough sections on the course. But I felt like that was about good for me.
Okay. So are you trying to hit a certain power, cadence, or RPE on the bike?
Yeah, I had a power target that I was working at, and I didn't quite get there. I was a little below it. I started out pretty close. Actually, I was a little over for the first probably 15, 20 miles. And so when you head out, you kind of head south, and there are some really nice long stretches where you can just sort of go. And people did start to get a little bit bunched up. So if you look at the course, the lower section is kind of like a triangle, and there's a turn. So then when you head back north, there was some bunching up, and I had to slow down. Like at one point, I was like out of arrow, just kind of trying to not get caught up in a draft pack. So then the piece that they added, the little turnaround where they had replaced the really rough road, was great because it spread everybody back out again, which was really nice. So that section, my power dropped quite a bit. Because I was trying to kind of stay out of the packs. So for probably, it was only a few miles, but it's frustrating when you're in a race. And then I was able to get my power back up, but my average power was a little below my target. But part of it, it was that section. And when I'd been doing kind of my race section practice, you asked about the sessions that gave me confidence. And I was riding with my coach. I was actually right about the power that I ended up racing at, which was a little below my target. And I knew that if I rode that power, I would still be at the front, potentially, at the front of the pro race with that wow. power.
So, I mean, you bike 2:20:08, and I think that's what about, let me do quick math here. That's what, about 24 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Wow. That's freaking crazy fast.
Thanks. It was the fastest bike split, so I have the record.
Really?
Yeah, because it was the first time they did the race. So, and I beat the pro women.
All of them?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was the fastest female bike split.
That's awesome. So you get like a new Ventum for that or something?
What?
Do you get like a new Ventum bike or something like that?
No, I'd love it. Yeah, anyone who wants to sponsor me. I'm looking for sponsors. So.
Wow.
I mean, I knew that was possible going into it, and that I didn't even have to be at my power target for that to be possible, which is kind of a cool feeling. But I definitely pushed to get where I was. So
wow.
I beat my coach, which was kind of cool.
So did you see a lot of flats on the bike course?
I saw a couple, not many, and I didn't see any crashes, which was
really.
Yeah, I don't know if I missed them, like if I passed them and didn't see them, but I didn't see any crashes. I did see one guy go off the road, but he made it back on. So, yeah.
Now that you say that, I remember seeing that in Chattanooga where a guy like literally went off the road into the grass and then came right back on the road. Like, yeah. I remember seeing that. Like, all of a sudden that just came back to my mind. I don't know why. So
yeah,
weird.
and he said, because I was like coming up on him and he's like, oh, that was close. And I was like, yeah, it was. But yeah, he made it back on, didn't crash. So but I saw a couple flats, but not too many.
Yeah. How are the aid stations?
I blew by them. I like to be self-supported on the bike. I just feel like the aid stations are dangerous. And so, I couldn't really tell you how well stocked they were on the bike because I didn't stop at any.
Okay. I mean, you're only out there less than 2.5 hours. I mean, it's pretty quick. So,
yeah.
Whenever you think of the course itself, do you feel like there's anything that people next year should be aware of going into this race?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, if you can drive the course, do it, because there are a lot of turns, so it helps to know where you're going to have, like, a nice drag that you can just really push your power and get your head down and just go. And then there are some sections where you just don't have that long in between the turns. So just kind of being aware of that, I think, helps. Like, my power was higher in the first half. I was more tired in the second half, but I also knew that there were really the kind of nice long segments in the first half. So I think that helps the strategy a little bit to kind of just sort of know what you're getting into. And then depending on what the course is like, if there are any really rough segments. So like I said, I had the chance to ride the beginning out of T1. So I knew that I would be fine at my race power in aero on that segment with my gloves. Because there were a lot of folks saying like, oh, don't even think about, being in aero until after the first turn. And had I done that, that would have been a very different start to my race. So just getting out there, riding what you can, and definitely kind of checking out where you have, good alternatives, a chance to really put your head down versus where you need to be a little bit more aware.
Okay. So whenever you think of the last, say, 2, maybe 3 miles of the bike course, are you doing anything to start preparing to start running?
For this race, not really. For this race, I was pretty much, well, that's not entirely true. For this race, my focus was definitely on the bike, and I wanted to put down the best bike split that I could, get as much buffer as I could going into the run. I do try to make sure that on the bike, I get in as many calories as I can. I'm at like 350 an hour on the bike, which is a lot. I have trouble getting a lot of calories in on the run. I'm more like 200, and I'm a heavier triathlete. So for me, like, I need to make sure that I've gotten my calories and my fluids on the bike. So Santa Cruz, actually coming off the bike, I felt pretty dehydrated. So I'm still kind of dialing that in. So, I did definitely make sure that I was drinking as much as I could in the last few miles. But for this race, I was pretty focused on like just keeping the power on and getting as much of a kind of cushion as I could. I was kind of drowsy at the end of this race, which was sort of weird. And I don't know how much of that was because the swim was so cold. I'm also playing around with like my race fuel on the bike. I used to really like to have my calories separate from water, and I've been mixing them to now where it's only my last bottle that's water. So it may have been that I tailed off on the sugar too soon, some combination, but I was a little tired, like sleepy tired at the end. So I was kind of just trying to make sure I got as much in and got to the end of the bike as fast as I could.
Okay. So as you get to T2, knowing that this is a 2 transition race, you get to T2. How does T2 go for you?
So I was a little drowsy at the end of the bike, a little disoriented. I came off the bike and I ran down the wrong side of transition. So there's no bike catchers at 70.3. So I ran down the wrong side, and I was literally all the way on one end. So I was on the wrong end of transition. So I got to run the entire way across transition with my bike because I started on the wrong side. So that did not go that well. Racked my bike. Didn't dump out my bag. Again, it's a clean transition, so the bags are hanging. I didn't dump it out. I put on my shoes and my visor and my race belt and my sunglasses, and I started to run and realized I forgot my inhaler in my bag.
Inhaler?
Yeah, I have asthma.
Oh, wow.
I don't. It's not usually an issue, but I had an asthma attack in my last full Ironman and my last marathon. So I bring it in case I need it. And I don't want to not have it if I need it. So I didn't make it very far before I realized I didn't have it, but I did have to go back and grab my inhaler. So T2 did not go as smoothly as it could have. So things to improve there. But that was it. I mean, nothing crazy. And then I was on my way.
Okay. So as you get out on the run course, how does the first mile go for you?
It wasn't that bad. I was pretty worried. So in Santa Cruz, again, the last race, I knew I wasn't going to be able to run the whole thing, but I thought I would do better than I did. So I was a little bit nervous about how this run was going to go. First mile, I didn't feel too bad. Second mile, I didn't feel too bad. So it was a good start for me. I was worried that, especially after putting in the effort I did on the bike, that I wasn't going to feel very good starting the run. So not too bad. The beginning of the run is reasonably flat. You're kind of running out of the tennis garden out to the golf course. I had looked at the elevation map and I had seen that there's, a couple 100 feet of gain. Didn't expect it to be a hilly run, but it was actually a pretty hilly run, surprisingly.
Really?
Yeah. Very few flat segments. So it's pretty flat coming out of transition. Then when you're on the golf course, it's just all little ups and downs. There's very few like flat segments, which I was not expecting at all. I just thought it was going to be pretty flat. Lots of little hills, very few flat areas.
So is this all on like grass?
There were a couple little dirt sections, but it was mostly on this little like golf cart path kind of thing. So
okay,
paved.
So like concrete, 8-foot wide trail, basically.
Yeah, like very, very windy. So you also had a little bit of trouble kind of gauging where you were because it was almost like switchbacks, lots of little windy turns and all up and down, and not much crowd support because it was on the golf course. So
is it good or bad for you?
I don't mind it as much not having crowd support. There were a lot of runners, which is good. It didn't feel like you were kind of off by yourself. It might have been nice to have a little bit more support, but it was the sections like coming in and out of the golf course. There's lots of support, so those were good.
Yeah. How are the aid stations on the run course?
The aid stations were pretty good. They ran out of ice really quickly.
Really?
Yeah. So I think it was a two loop course. By the second loop, the first golf course aid station was already out of ice. So I was I was not the front of the race, but relatively, towards the front of the race.
I mean, you got a sub 5 hour time. You're towards the front of the race.
Yeah. And they were out of ice. So I think, again, inaugural race, they're learning a little bit, but, they didn't run out of, I use on-course nutrition for the run. So, water and cliff shots, basically. And they had plenty of those at all the aid stations. And they had aid stations every mile, which was nice. Sometimes there's that more than that. Yeah.
So as far as the middle miles of the run goes, say from miles 4 through 9, how are these miles going?
4 through 9 are a little bit of a black hole.
It is. It always is.
Yeah. So coming off the bike, I had a great bike. I had someone tell me, one of my teammates who was just spectating, let me know that I was first in the age group by 11 minutes.
Wow.
And yeah.
That's a confidence booster.
Yeah. So my 2 goals were win my age group, and then if I could, to try to break the top 3 amateur women. But I was like 6th at that point. And just knowing where my run is, I didn't expect to be able to run down to the top 3. So by the time I was at like mile 4, I had somebody tell me that I was still in first and the second place woman was running 30 seconds a mile faster than me. So I knew there was no way that I was not going to win if I kept pace. So, I stopped and went to the bathroom at like mile 7. And, at that point I was like not trying to kill myself. I was trying to keep sub 8 pace and just sort of keep trucking. So it was nice to have that cushion and know one of my goals wasn't going to happen no matter how fast I ran. And the other one, I just had to kind of keep moving and I would do it. So I had a little bit of confidence from that. So they weren't easy. It's never easy, but it was nice to kind of be in that position of like, I just got to, manage my body temperature and manage my breathing and just keep moving.
Right. Usually some of these miles, you start really thinking about why you're out there in the first place. So why are you out there in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first triathlon I did sort of in memory of an aunt who had passed away. She was sort of inspirational to me. She just in my family, she was a role model for really valuing the integration of fitness into your life and how important health is. And she had passed away. She was planning to do a triathlon for her 70th birthday, and she passed away when she was 69. Around that time, I had started a wellness program at my company, and it was more focused on work-life balance. But they had started, one of the first things that they had everybody do was this little sprint triathlon. So it was 2015, and I had to buy a bike to do it. But it was sort of this nice integration of, honoring my aunt and then kind of supporting this program that I had started. And I just really fell in love with triathlon. And I think it pushes you in ways that very few things do in life. You're not in positions to really test your limits that often, and especially physically. So for me, I just sort of fell in love with, learning more about what I can do and, just constantly discovering that, there's more there than I thought there was. So, this race and, when you're starting to think about why you're doing it, it's partly, when it gets hard, that's why you're doing it, right? Is to see if you can keep going and to, push past those limits. And then thinking about my kids are my biggest supporters. So I think about them a lot in those miles, especially my daughter is 8 and she collects all my medals. So thinking about, getting, the next medal for Caitlin and how excited she'll be. And also, just through what happened in Texas and my recovery, I mentioned that I had started a blog and I was pretty open about how difficult it was and the process that I'd gone through. And, I was really surprised by how many people seemed to really appreciate that and were really inspired to read about it and to, just hear about, the recovery and what's possible. So kind of all of those things, of like personally pushing past those limits, doing it to, show my kids that they can do anything that they want to and to kind of make them proud. And then also now I feel like there are other people watching, and like when they see that, it also helps other people to know that they can do a lot more than they think they can. And, if I can do this after breaking my whole body in April, that, maybe they can run that mile or whatever that goal is that they've been working towards.
Wow, that's powerful. Like, it seems like your aunt had a very significant role in your life.
Yeah, she was a pretty phenomenal woman. So she's missed, definitely.
Wow. When did she pass away?
She passed away in 2014.
So literally right before you started getting triathlon in 2015.
Yeah, exactly. So 2015 was going to be her 70th birthday. And she was planning to do a triathlon that year. And so that's the year that I did my first.
That's awesome. So you just continued her legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, sometimes I think about her too. And she'd be really excited and proud. I know she would be. So I feel like she's with me sometimes when I'm racing.
Wow. So to kind of transition back to the race here, miles 7, 8, 9, and 10, were you dealing with any cramping or GI issues? You said you went to the restroom?
I did stop at the porta potty. It was to pee. I didn't pee on the bike. I usually pee on the bike, and I started the run having to pee. And I kind of felt at that point like I had, it was okay if I stopped and peed, and then, yeah, comfort was worth it at that point. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as the run course, did you see anything funny?
Not really. Funny, peculiar, or funny?
Yeah, anything. Doesn't matter.
There's a local tri club there called the Salton Sea Tri Club, and they had some like funny signs and things, and there was some great support from the Salton Sea Tri Club. But yeah, no, I mean nothing really peculiar. Nothing stands out.
Okay. Now, as far as your watch that you're wearing, what data screens do you want to look at?
During the run?
Yeah.
During the run, I mostly am looking at pace, distance, and I have heart rate up there too. Just trying to make sure that I don't redline too much. Because especially at the beginning of the run, I tend to go out too fast.
I don't think you're the only one that struggles with that.
Yeah, the legs just want to go. And yeah, so kind of trying to not kill myself at the beginning of the run. And then, in the middle and towards the end, the same thing, especially here. Because again, it was hillier than I was expecting. I'd done a lot of running on a treadmill. I hadn't done a lot of hill work. I wasn't expecting a lot of hills. So trying to make sure I was managing my heart rate and body temperature. So I was watching heart rate a bit on the run. But usually it's more I'm watching pace and distance. I'm almost at that next mile.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So after you pass mile 10, you have a 5K left. How are you feeling at this point?
Like, just get me there. No, yeah, the last 5K, it's always nice to know you've only got a 5K to go. You're kind of coming out of the golf course at that point, which is nice too. Or at least you're, on your way out of the golf course. And then once you're out and you're kind of back on the road, you run out and there's a little turnaround and you kind of run back and then you're running up towards the tennis garden. So yeah, it was a relief to be towards the end. I'm like that on my regular training runs too. When I've got a 5K left, it's kind of a nice little marker that I've only got a 5K to go. So I was, looking forward to being done, feeling pretty good about, if the splits were right, I knew I still had some cushion and I just kind of needed to get there. And just looking forward to finishing. I was feeling pretty happy about having a decent race and finishing 2018 strong.
Nice. So after you get to mile, say 12 and a half, you realize that you have about a half mile left.
Yeah.
When do you realize that you're really coming back from the wreck in April with a strong finish, and this is almost like a redemption for you in a sense, right? Because it's like, I'm really back. When did you get that feeling that, okay, I'm actually doing this again. And how are those emotions there?
Yeah, I really didn't feel that way until I finished.
Really?
To be honest. Yeah, my swim was really slow for me. 37 minutes. I haven't swam since my first half Ironman. I'm usually more of a 32-minute swimmer, so I was a little bit disappointed. The bike, I had a great bike. I knew that I probably did really well on the bike, but I was a little below where I wanted to be with my power. I know that I could have done better. My transitions, I completely messed up. And then on the run course was short, so I think it shows my pace is like 7:38. But my watch was showing more like a little over 8, right around 8, which was sort of like my upper limit of what I wanted. And so I was kind of thinking like, yeah, it was a good race. I'm happy. I'm happy with it. I'm happy I ran the whole thing. I'm really happy to be finished. And, then I crossed the finish line. And then it sort of sunk in that I'd won my age group by like 6 minutes. Like, it's not like I just won it. Like, I'd won it by a good margin. I broke the top 10. And then my coach came over and told me that because we were joking about like maybe I'd set the course record on the bike. And he's like, you got the fastest bike split. And that I had actually beaten him, which was pretty cool. So then it sort of hit me that like, how could I have really asked for a better end of the year? I mean, the swim, I got exactly what I deserved, but the run, my goal was to run the whole thing and to run at 8-minute pace. And the funny thing is that like what I really wanted was to be able to be around, 7:40 or so. And the official time says 7:38. So I was like, well, I'll take it. And then and then to have such a great bike, and it was pretty awesome. And then, the award ceremony too. Like I actually did make the podium in Santa Cruz. I was 4th, and it was the first time I'd ever made a podium. So to then be first was pretty phenomenal, and to have my teammates there cheering, and so it really wasn't like the last half mile. The last half mile, I was still like, oh, just get me across the finish line. And I wasn't quite at the time I wanted to be. But as soon as I was finished and kind of like it's sunk in and, just the magnitude of the year and all of that, it was pretty awesome.
Wow. So after you finished and you did the award ceremony, how was your recovery process?
Pretty easy. Not too bad. I was a little sore the next day, but not too bad. And, it's the holidays. So, of course, my coach was saying, well, it's time for the off season, and I don't want to have an off season yet. I couldn't even walk in May, so I kind of feel like I'm just sort of ramping up. So no, I feel really good. I had a little bit of downtime, but I'm pretty much back to almost normal training, and I'm looking forward to 2019.
Nice. So what's something that you learned from this race experience that you would want to pass on to someone who is going to race this race next year?
Oh, yeah. I would say for the swim, definitely it's going to be cold. So make sure that you've done some cold water swims. Make sure you're comfortable with your equipment that you're wearing. So I did get I had never actually worn the cap that I wore, the neoprene cap, and I got chafed on the front of my neck, which was, usually I get chafed on the back of my neck from my wetsuit. This time I didn't get chafed on the back of my neck, but I did get chafed on the front of my neck from the strap, the chin strap. So I hadn't even put Vaseline there or anything. I didn't even know to expect that. So I would say, cold water swim, make sure you've got, you're prepared for that and you've tried out kind of all of your equipment for that. And give yourself extra time because there's the little wetsuit decontamination process. And, any point to point race, it takes a little bit longer to check everything in. The bike I already mentioned, there are a couple of sections that are a little bit bumpy. So just getting a sense for what that's going to be like. So considering whether you want gloves or something like that. And then, the road conditions, because it really was just in the couple of days leading up to the race that there was a lot of sand across the road. And then the run, be prepared, is actually a little bit hilly, which I was not expecting. I really thought it was going to be flat. So it was a bit of a surprise. But
did you get sunburnt?
No, I didn't.
Well,
I didn't.
Cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even think to ask that.
Yeah, no, I had sleeves on down to about my elbows. Usually when I get sunburned, it's on my back from the bike if I'm wearing a sleeveless. But yeah, no sunburn, which is nice.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
So looking back on it, how well prepared for this race do you feel like you were?
I was very prepared for parts of it. For a whole race, not so much. Yeah, definitely not prepared for the swim, probably 80% for the bike and probably 80% for the run and 110 for the bike. So not exactly a balanced athlete going into this race. Yeah, and that's okay. It was where I needed to be this year, but a lot to learn and a lot to improve. So really, focusing this winter on getting the swim and the run to where they need to be, and trying to get some of that balance. But yeah, probably 90% overall.
Wow.
Should have been.
So how much more time do you need to shave off before you get in the top 3?
At this race, it would have been 11 minutes.
11 minutes.
Yeah, which, my swim was a good 5 minutes slower than it should have been, and my run was at least 5 minutes slower than it should have been.
And then another minute in T2.
Yeah, so I should be able to do it. It's just got to start swimming. Yeah, but I can definitely do it. Last year around this time, I ran a marathon and I wasn't trained for it. And I ran a 3:15 marathon. So without training, so then if I'm training and getting my run back to where it should be, I should be able to run in the low 130s, which would be 10 minutes right there. And yeah, so hopefully it won't be too long.
Yeah. So for first timers that are doing this race next year, what advice would you give them?
For first timers?
Yeah.
Again, the swim. So for first timers, I think a lot of folks do get really nervous about the swim, and this is a really cold swim. So it's easy to panic on cold swims. So again, just making sure that you're used to swimming in cold water. The benefit is it's not the ocean. You don't have, there was a little chop, but it's not like an ocean swim that way, but it is cold, and the cold water can like knock the wind out of you. So just kind of being familiar with that feeling and that it'll pass. Cause as I mentioned, even, I'm a pretty experienced swimmer, and I had panic a little bit of, can I actually do this? My arms are so cold. So I would say definitely making sure that they've done the cold water swim. Yeah. And thinking about ways to keep your hands and feet warm when you get out of the water, because the bike is pretty flat. So again, it's just corners, and the run is, it's up and down, but there's no big hills. So for first timers, probably focus on, having a good start to the race. And then also giving a lot of time, just to drop everything off. It takes longer than you think it's going to.
Okay. And
for spectators too, this year was a little bit tough. I think, there's been a lot of uproar about traffic issues from the race, and they're looking. So some of the major roads in the area were closed for the race, and there weren't a lot of really good, well-marked alternative routes. So there were a lot of traffic jams. So for spectators, it was a little tricky. You could take buses from T2, from basically the finish line up to the swim start, and then you could get bussed back. But the buses coming back didn't leave until 9:30. And I was told they took like an hour and a half because the traffic was so bad. So you would miss the pro finish, basically.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So there were some really bad traffic issues. So, if you can stay walking distance from the finish line, that's probably good. If you want to get to the start, maybe think about different ways to get there. Like, can you Uber most of the way and take your bike, or, those sorts of strategies. And I'm sure that it'll be better next year. Again, it was the first year they did the race. But it was a little tricky. So like after the race, I had a friend, I was staying like less than a half a mile from the finish line. But I was tired, and I had a friend who said, I'll drop you at your hotel. And it took like over an hour to get there, just driving around until the roads were open, trying to find any way to get close. So
that's craziness.
Yeah. So I would say that's one thing to think about, the logistics for spectating. And especially if you want to catch like the pro finish, you might want to forego the buses to and from the swim start, or figure out kind of an alternate way to get there. Okay.
So we covered a lot about your race. Do you have anything else you want to
add? Not really. I mean, we talked about most of it. Just, I really couldn't be happier with how I finished the season. I definitely didn't think that I would race again this year, especially not twice after Texas. And so to finish the season, with a win, an age group win, was pretty awesome, and a bike course record. So,
wow. So what's next for you?
I'm still working back to being able to do another full. The biggest limiter is still the run. So getting my run back to where I can run a marathon after biking for 4 or 5 hours. So I've been building towards Ironman Santa Rosa next May. And I'll be doing Oceanside 70.3 kind of as part of the build to Santa Rosa.
So Oceanside and Santa Rosa.
Yep.
Wow. So what's your goals for Santa Rosa?
I want to win it.
Wow.
There's no pro race. So
you're right. There isn't.
So I want to win it. That's my goal.
Wow.
I don't have a time goal yet, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to have you back on after both those races if you'd be up for it.
Absolutely. It would be great.
Awesome. So what races are on your bucket list?
Oh, bucket list is really long. I haven't done that many races. I think I've done like 11 triathlons or something like that ever. I really want to do Wildflower someday.
Yeah.
It's nearby and it's just an iconic race. I've got to do Kona. Kona's on the list. I did mention that I really would like to go for my pro card. And if I get it, I'll take it and I'll just postpone going to Kona unless I qualify as a pro, which is highly unlikely. But I'll just postpone Kona. But I'm going to go there someday. I would like to race probably Ironman France. I know I passed on the Nice slot, but someday I would like to race there. That's probably it at this point. There's so many, but really the biggest one is probably Kona. But I'm probably not going to get there for a while. Hopefully I won't get there for a while because that will mean that I got my pro card.
Yeah. Wow. Well, good luck at Oceanside in your training and going into Santa Rosa. And I only have one more question for you, and that's to wrap up the episode. And that's, what's your definition of a perfect race?
Oh, that's a good question. Gosh, a perfect race. I don't know if there is such a thing in terms of, results. I think it's more, if I could have a race where I felt like very satisfied that I left everything out on the course, that would be the perfect race. So, finish the swim and feel like I did the absolute best that I could do in that swim, not make a bunch of mistakes in transition, have a relatively clean transition, really feel like I emptied my legs on the bike, and then have the run be pretty terrible feeling, but one of those runs where you just really feel like everything that you had left, you left out on the course. I think that would be the perfect race because you really can't ask for more than that.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, Alyson, thank you so much for coming on the show, spending some time with me today. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to following you next year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Have a good day, okay? Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.